Welcome back. We appreciate you staying with us here on this Sunday afternoon. Dr. Gene Brockmeyer joining us this afternoon from the University of Toledo, studying video games and the violent, the violent video games and how that affects our culture over the last few years. And we were talking about desensitization. And in your field of study, when you've looked at that, these video games, playing them over and over again, and then you get this tragedy at Sandy Hook affecting elementary school children. And why is there not, I guess, the effect on kids when they see real life happenings, yet they can sit down and play these video games, and from an educated perspective?
Mm-hmm. Well, when you're playing a game, there's a certain distance. I think that obviously there isn't when you see a real life tragedy, and so the true impact of an action like killing somebody in a video game isn't processed in your brain the same way as it would be processed in real life.
But is there study there to show there are lingering effects? You mentioned before, when the Supreme Court was making its decision, there was evidence, scientific evidence, short-term scientific evidence, but there was no long-term scientific evidence. So is that the problem? Is that where the rub lies, the fact that we can't yet figure out what the long-term effects of this stuff are?
Well, I think that's part of the issue, because long-term research is very expensive, and we really haven't been studying video games that long. Those studies are going on now. There are some short-term, long-term studies that do indicate that exposure to a violent video game creates less desire for helping another person, is associated with lower empathy. Mm-hmm. So there are signs that there is a relationship, but I think that it can be argued and is argued that the evidence is not strong enough yet.
You set out your hypothesis when you start any study. I want to prove this, but have you been surprised over the years of what you've found in studying this issue?
Well, I think the thing that's the most disturbing to me is the issue of desensitization, and that's hard to study because it's the absence of a reaction. And I think in the long run, that's going to be the most important effect of exposure to violence in video games. Mm-hmm. Just that you see violence as being unreal even when it's real. You hear people say that. I couldn't believe this was happening. It seemed like a movie. It seemed like a video game.
But why is it that, you look back in history, and obviously there have been violent outbreaks, there are wars. I mean, kids today, kids that I teach, most of their life has been consumed by our country being at war, and that is very real, obviously. But why is there that disconnect? Why is there that I guess separation as far as violence in movies, violence in TV, violence in reality?
Well, you know, the truth is that many people find violent actions entertaining in a media sense, and we're not completely.
People used to complain about the Three Stooges,
right?
About too much violence there.
Right.
My Lord, I mean, jump ahead 30, 40 years, and then it becomes this.
Yeah. It's partly a forbidden fruit phenomenon where you're doing something that you can't do in real life. That seems to be what attracts some people. For other people, it's like mastering their fear about a situation. So there's different reasons why people find violence entertaining.
Is this just a slippery slope we're traveling down? And I don't want our viewers to think, you and I are a couple of squares and we live these devout lives where we're not influenced by anything. But I think it's setting the stage for problems down the road. Yes?
Well, I'm concerned about that, and I'm especially concerned because video games are only going to get more realistic. I mean, they're talking about games.
Samuel Alito mentioned that in his opinion. Mm-hmm. From this case, he said it's only time before people, and this may have been the point you were coming to, and I apologize for interrupting, but he said there's only time before you will start to feel the blood on your skin spattered from somebody who you shoot in a video game.
Well,
very graphic details.
We've moved from, joysticks to actually having, a baseball bat and a bowling ball, and people can make the characters in video games look like real people and then do terrible things to them.
Yeah. As we start to bring together our conversation, you were telling me about the latest studying that you're doing with some graduate students, looking to bring our viewers up to speed on the latest work that you've got going on.
Well, one of the things that researchers are concerned about is the phenomenon of addiction to video games, and it does appear that there is a significant percentage, maybe 5%, of game players who could be considered addicted using criteria for other addictions like gambling. So we're trying to figure out what kind of person might be vulnerable to becoming addicted as a way to really set the stage for dealing with that problem.
What is the criteria, right? And you said comparable to other addictions, but what is the criteria?
Well, there aren't any formal criteria. They're just being studied by researchers.
Okay.
But basically, it's having the need, sort of a compulsive need to continue to play. And if that play is taken away from you, you feel terrible. And you also give up other parts of your life to continue to play.
So you see signs and symptoms of other addictions, gambling,
Right.
alcoholism, things of that nature.
Well, the same behaviors that are associated with those better established addictions.
And you were telling me overseas, they actually have clinics geared specifically toward this problem,
That's correct.
not just addiction.
No, video game addiction, right.
And that's been in action how long?
Oh, for years in some countries, South Korea, for example.
So we're just behind the ball on having things like that necessary to mental health and health insurance, that kind of thing?
Well, in the United States, there are some treatment programs, but there are not very many treatment programs.
As we move forward into 2013 and we wait for the answer on this task force, you think, and I think I remember you saying in the first segment, you think there will be definite mental health issues addressed?
I think that there will be, mental health will be important in the conversation. I think that we need to have better access to treatment for children and adolescents, but I don't know that mental health should be the heart of the conversation. It just needs to be part of it.
And because of the First Amendment, free speech, so on and so forth, do you think it would be the government's role to get involved and try to curtail what Hollywood and what some of these video game producers put out there on the market?
You know, I'm not sure that that big a step is going to happen, but I do think that it's reasonable to revisit the California law and think about, is it a good idea to restrict the access of children to games that are really developed for adults?
Dr. Jean Brockmeyer, we so appreciate you spending some time with us here at 13 ABC Action News here on the Roundtable. Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year.
And thank you so much for being here, and we'll wrap things up for this Sunday right after this. Stay with us.